Hi everyone, welcome to another webinar from Path Builder. Today we will be covering the topic on how to crack an interview as a fresher. Quickly to introduce myself, my name is Amit Antony Alex. I am one of the co-founders of Path Builder, a not-for-profit organization, and I'll talk a little more about Path Builder. The idea of this webinar is to help young people who are starting to build their professional career in terms of navigating to the interview process. And for young people, it can be a tough and nervous experience trying to navigate the interview process, especially if you're doing the first few times. Also do check out the earlier webinar that we have conducted at Path Builder, which was to help you strategize your job search. This webinar helps you to get to an interview, and the idea is this webinar that we are conducting today gives you an idea. Once you get an interview call, how do you prepare yourself? And during the interview, what do recruiters look for in terms of judging or analyzing you? During the webinar, everybody remains muted. If you have any questions, you can just drop it in the chat window. We'd also ask for some questions during the sign-up process, and we did get a few responses. So, we will leave some time at the end for Q&A. Okay, so quickly, just talking about Path Builder and what we do. We are, as I said, a not-for-profit organization whose purpose is to help young people take action towards their purpose. We envision an equitable and invulnerable and compassionate world. And our mission is to mobilize, equip, and motivate young people to embark on careers that will help redefine tomorrow. And how we do it is through multiple ways. We want to provide access to information, so I'll talk about that. Going forward, we would want to set up networking opportunities for young people to interact with people who are already, let's say, in the social impact space or creating career or have a career that has purpose. We want to provide one-on-one career counseling. We will be conducting workshops that help young people reflect on their key strengths, help them identifying and developing leadership tools, empathy, things that we believe that will help them in their professional career. We also plan to conduct or set up local chapters that, end of the day, help with sort of community engagement. In terms of the information resources, we conduct these webinars on a regular basis, so keep looking out for the space. We do conduct at least one webinar every month. We do podcasts on a regular basis. These are much more shorter versions where we bring in industry experts or practitioners where they share a very realistic insider point of view on specific sectors or roles. We've also started a weekly job digest newsletter that shares curated opportunities for candidates, especially 0 to 3 years of work experience. We've also started blogs and articles in the social impact space that we keep sharing. And going forward, we want to set up our website where we can share more resources. So that's what Path Builder does. And quickly moving to the agenda for today's call, we'll primarily be covering 3 areas. Starting with how do you prepare yourself before the interview? Then what are things that you need to be aware during the interview? And then post the interview, how do you address some of the issues or challenges that you might face? The way we have sort of constructed the webinar is in sort of tips. We've tried to keep it as practical as possible so that you can easily relate to it and it's easily implementable steps that you can engage. So starting with before the interview. So this is assuming that you've applied for a job and you've got an email or a phone call that's saying, hey, we want to interview you. It could be virtual, it could be physical face-to-face, but the idea is there is either a recruiter or somebody from the company on the other end. What I also want to just highlight before we get into this is the entire recruitment process is itself quite a challenging one. From my experience, when somebody applies for a job, they are competing anywhere between 200 to 300 on an average applicants, which means, just even getting an interview call is a big step, right? Because you've been shortlisted from among 200 to 300. So you should feel, glad or delighted if you get to an interview. Just keep that in mind. That should help with your confidence level as well, I guess. So what are sort of tips before the interview, right? I would say the first number one tip that I can provide is do as much research about the employer and the role. You might, have an impressive resume. You might have gone to IIM or an IIT. But what will really help you stand out during the interview is to make sure you've done your research about an organization, about the employer and the role. I think this is a key factor, and most young people, especially freshers, don't realize how important it ends up being. I would say start with reading the job description multiple times. If there is a role that is similar within the sector, look at other job descriptions. Get a as far as you can understand, try and understand the role as thoroughly as possible. Write down what you think you are expected to do. We'll talk about why that will be useful a little later on in this webinar, but I think just understanding your job description. So for example, when I interview people, one of the first questions that I ask is, what do they know about the role? This is just to test candidates, right? And it becomes really frustrating for an interviewer when there is a candidate who's not really done their research. It shows for me a lack of unprofessionalism. It shows a lack of initiative. So, these days there is a lot of information out there. There might be a chance that you're interviewing for a really small organization that doesn't have a lot of information out there. It could be a startup that's still at an early stage, but there will be some information out there. I would say do as much research as possible. Write down notes, keep them handy. It will be useful to you during the interview. The second tip that I have, and this is something that I have found very useful, is to actually do a little bit of stalking. In most cases, you might not know the interviewer, but you definitely would know at least their name. Google them, look them up on LinkedIn. Try and identify some things that you might find are common interest. I found it very useful during my professional career when I've interviewed to at least have some kind of an icebreaker that I can use or a conversation starter where I've identified something common. It could be as simple as, hey, you went to so-and-so college around this year. I had a friend or a cousin who went to the same college. Or, I read online that you're interested in a certain sport. Yeah, I'm also, a fan of that sport. Which team do you support? Simple things like that, what it does is it automatically personalizes you and the interviewer. It builds a rapport, and everybody, because we're human beings, we want to have a personal connect, right? It just breaks ice and it moves a very formal setting to a less formal setting where, there is some sort of relatable thing between the interviewer and you. There might be cases where you will not pick up anything online about the interviewer or recruiter. My suggestion then is to really be attentive and listen carefully to the interviewer. interviewers usually, talk about something or the other that you might find common interest on, and you might just have to agree with them to build that rapport. So that is tip number 2. And then, so that's how you prepare, before you go for an interview. I think these 2 are very, very critical things to do, especially just researching about the employer and the role, being thorough about it, can really help you distinguish yourself or differentiate yourself from other candidates. So then is the actual interview, right? Again, as I said, this could be a virtual interview or it could be a face-to-face interview. A lot of interviews right now, especially the first or second round, can be face-to-face. So let's see, what are tips that I can provide you on that. Tip number 3 is setting up your first impression. That old saying, first impression make the best impressions. It's very, very true. Whether you're doing face-to-face or virtual, I would say, start with a smile. It's as simple as that, right? Everybody wants to be greeted by a warm and friendly face. Especially in a virtual environment, try and sit in a noise-free area. I think it's really important, unless it's completely avoidable. If you are outdoor while you're doing an interview, one of the first things you should do is, for me, apologize. Apologize that unavoidably you are in that space. There will be disturbance. Set that context up. Make sure you have a good internet connection. I think, especially for virtual meetings or for interviewers, having an uninterrupted sort of interview becomes critical. Think of it like this. The interview is probably doing 7, 8 interviews in a day, back to back. They want to have a conversation, get things done. They don't want to have an interview where your voice is breaking, your video is breaking. It can get really, really frustrating. I don't think I've put this down, but be on time. I am somebody who believes that if you want to be any meeting, forget an interview, be 5 minutes early. You have nothing, absolutely nothing to lose. Being 5 minutes early in meetings for me has helped me build just a rapport, because it gives me, 5 minutes to just have small talk with somebody who I'm meeting with. It also just sets up a really good impression. So your first impression is, hey, this person has turned up 5 minutes early. Trust me, it works wonders. And then dress up professionally. Even if you are on a virtual call, I would say it's important to just be professionally dressed up, which means no torn t-shirt or improper t-shirt with some kind of a slogan or a Marvel character. No offense meant, but it's just about how you convey professionalism more than anything. And we'll talk about sort of body language and how you need to sort of wear your confidence. And start with a warm greeting. It's as simple as, hey, hello, good morning, good evening, with a smile, asking, how was the day, how is it going? Small things like that make a big difference when you set the first impression. Tip number 4 is just confidence in your body language. In a virtual environment or a virtual meeting, this still is important. I think it's definitely more important on a face-to-face meeting. For me, body language is about speaking without speaking, right? It's about what you do with different parts of your body. Rule number 1, make eye contact, be it a physical one or a virtual one. When we get nervous, we tend to not make eye contact, right? You want to portray some level of confidence. You might be a fresher, but you still want to portray some level. Even in a virtual interview, look into the camera, look into the interviewer, right? Listen. I've seen this is a big or a difficult thing when I've interviewed young people, that I've had young people cut me off during an interview. Never do that. Let the interviewer finish what they are talking about. Listen, and when I talk about listen, I talk about active listening. which is to really pick up keywords, understand what someone is saying, and then respond accordingly. I would say sit up straight, be it a virtual one. Even if it's a virtual interview where, let's say the cameras are not on, I would say sit up straight, dress up. Even there, make eye contact with the screen, because then it gives the same impression of having a conversation. And the last one is, what do you do with your hands? And this is something even I have really struggled with, be it virtual interviews or face-to-face interviews. What do you do with your hands actually say a lot about you. Use your hands to showcase your emotion, showcase your passion. Don't leave it in your pocket. You don't leave it behind. If you don't know what to do with your hands, just keep them, rest them on your lips, I would say. That would be what I would suggest. And be confident and be authentic and be positive. I know these are like words that we use, but one way to practice before an interview, I would say, is just look yourself in the mirror, right? Put a chair, look yourself in the mirror and see how it goes. If not, we all take selfies. Take a selfie video of yourself. It could be giving an answer. It gives you a really good sense in terms of, how are you sitting? How are you portraying yourself? And during an interview, keep observing. So it's, for me, as important as listening is just to keep observing. Try to assess the mood of the interview room, right? Sometimes there are interviewers who keep it very light and humorous, but you're still in an interview. I would say keep a professional tone. If you have the ability to crack a joke or two, not everybody can do it, but the safe thing to do, I would say, is to keep a professional tone and be confident. So that is tip number 4. Tip number 5, which is related to sort of the pre-interview, which is about doing research, right? But then once you get into the interview, I think it's really important to show your interest in the company or the organization that you have applied for. What really gets any interviewer going about a candidate is when they say, I really want to work for your company, right? But now back it with facts. Why do you really want to work with a certain organization, right? You might know very little about it, but the more more research you do, more information you can have about the company. What that means is trying to frame your answers to show that you're interested in a company, right? So, for example, if a typical question, and we'll talk about it, is, what are your strengths, right? So you talk about, let's say, my strength is the ability to converse with different groups of people, right? And you can say that and answer it saying, this is my strength, and I believe it'll be useful in this role, and it will help contribute to the organization, right? Or you could be a team player. That could be your strength, right? And you could say, the organization has a really good team. I'm really keen on working. I believe I have the strength. That is my key strength, to be part of a team player, right? So you're saying that, hey, I know your company really well. This is my strength, and I really would like to work for you, right? If you find interesting information about an organization, right, bring that up. So, for example, let's say you're interviewing for an NGO that works with children, and last year they helped educate 22,000 children. That's a fact that you read in their annual report, for example. Right? Bring it up to the interview. Say that, hey, what really caught my eye was that the so-and-so NGO touched 22,000 kids, right? This again gives the impression to the interviewer that you're prepared, that you're really excited about the work that the company does. And then I would say the last part is just having your questions ready about the company's culture, what the company does. And we'll talk about that later on. But again, that again shows your interest in a company or an organization. Great. So tip number 6 now comes to the part of how to answer some of the tricky questions that come your way during an interview. And then these are questions that I've tried to identify being very common questions that are asked on a regular basis. So let's look into this, right? Starting with, why should we hire you, right? Very common question that comes up in an interview. And I've actually got responses that it sounds like a good job, or I saw the job, job posting and I applied. Those are really bad answers, right? Don't give a vague answer. A vague answer shows that you are unprepared. It goes back to that first step, right? Doing your research. Why do you want to really work for that company? This is an opportunity to showcase how you're qualified and what strengths really fit the job you're applying for. Again, you could be a fresher, you could still have just recently graduated or still in college, right? But there is some skills that you have. Let's say you're applying for an analyst or an internship role at an impact investing firm. You might have done a business model course or subject during your MBA or your undergrad, or you could be really good at Excel. Talk about that. You say, this is what I'm really good at, and I think that will be a good fit. That's why you should hire me, right? So that's how you frame that question. Don't be vague. Have 1 or 2 points that you clearly do. And these are questions that you can prepare before any interview, right? Then the next question is, what are your strengths, right? This is always an opportunity to really showcase yourself. And understand this, right? An interview is about selling yourself, unfortunately. Don't be humble during an interview. Don't be humble even during a job search, right? It is a competitive space. When a company is interviewing you, also know it's still competitive. They're probably interviewing 5 or 6 other people. How can you differentiate yourself? How can you really make yourself stand out amongst all the other competitors, right? It's a key thing. And when the question comes about your strengths, I think that's a big opportunity for you to showcase yourself. So if you have really read the job descriptions, you know that skill 1, 2, 3 are what the company is looking for. That should be your strength, right? Talk about that. Let's say you are interviewing for a starting role as an M&E analyst, a monitoring and evaluation analyst, right? You talk about how you're really good with data. Talk about statistical tools that you might have used during your undergrad course or during your course of studies. Or it could be an additional course that you did online. It could be even a free course, right? But really telling them that, hey, this is what I believe my strengths are, right? It gives it's a tick mark for an interview, right? An interviewer is trying to assess you. They're trying to see if you're a good fit for the role. You are answering to that, right? What it also leads is the next set of questions. So let's say you say, I'm really good with R, which is a statistical tool. And then the interviewer might ask you, tell me more about it. So try not bullshit way too much. Back your answers with data. So if somebody asks you about R, talk about projects that you might have done during your college, using R. Again, R is a statistical software that people use in the M&E space. It could be, as I said, Excel. It could be PowerPoint. It could be your writing skill, right? Talk about a few articles that you might have written or papers you might have written while you're in college. So those are very specific skills. So linking job description, what are skills required in the job descriptions to this answer is the right way to answer. Then the next question that we can look at is, if somebody asks for strength, they usually ask for weakness as well. These are actually answers that I've listened to. I've had people say that I don't have any weakness. Everybody has weakness, right? It's the simple truth of it. When I ask this question, I am trying to gauge even the humbleness or humility of a person, right? I'm looking at the willingness of somebody to learn. And as a young person, as a young professional, showcasing the ability to learn and giving an honest response goes a long way in your candidacy, right? You can talk about weakness and frame it as skills that you would want to improve, right? So again, looking at the job description, if there are one or two areas that you feel are not really your strength point, you can talk about that as your weakness. Say, hey, my Excel skills can be improved, and I am doing an online course, or I'm learning, right? What that sets the expectation with the interviewer is, hey, this person at least knows about themselves and they are in the path of improving and working towards. Trust me, it'll make a big, big difference. I've heard about people talk about I'm being a perfectionist, right? That isn't a weakness. For me, that doesn't make any sense, right? If you're a perfectionist, I would say that's your strength, because you're somebody who will go to depths to get things done, right? So think about how you frame it. Again, go back to the job description. Within the job descriptions, look at what are skills that are not really to your strength. That should be your weakness. Then comes to the question of, why have you decided to apply for this position, right? I've actually got this answer of somebody saying, I'm getting bored with my current job. That shouldn't be a reason why you're applying for a job, right? Again, avoid vague answers here. This goes back to the earlier point about just knowing the organization and the role, and then building your answer towards that, right? I really want to work for your organization because I'm passionate about what you guys do. Let's say you work in an environment with wildlife. That could be your passion. That should be the reason you're applying for this job, right? Or it could be, which will come to the next question, is I want to become the head of partnership at a large organization, and this is my starting role. I believe I will learn a lot from this role and the organization. Got it. So you're very, very clearly saying you've researched the company, you've proven that you're a good fit. That is why you want to apply for this. Again, I will say, if you have any questions, just feel free to type it in the chat window. At the end, we will make sure that we keep at least 10 to 15 minutes to answer any questions that any of you might have. The other tricky question that comes is, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? I know the most cliched answer is, in your job to the interviewer or in your role. Again, I think it's a funny thing to say, but it's not really a good answer. You can't clearly say, I hate that question. And in honestly, most of us don't really have an answer for this as well, right? What an interviewer is looking is whether you have some clarity of thought in terms of where you see yourself from the current job you're applying to where you want to go. In most cases, especially if you are, let's say, an undergraduate, fresher, and you want to go for higher studies, it's perfectly fine to say that in 3 years, 4 years, I want to do a master's, right? And this job will give me certain skill set and experience that I know will be useful for my master's. Let's say you've already done your master's, you very little of work experience. You can say that in 5 years, I would like to be working either for this organization or another organization. Just be honest, right? What I've seen as good answer is if somebody says 2 or 3 options, right? What it gives, like for me when I'm interviewing and somebody says, hey, I don't really know where I want to be 5 years, but option 1, I want to do a master's. Option 2, I want to be an entrepreneur. Option 3, I want to be working at a certain role in a certain organization. For me, that still shows clarity of thought. It shows that you're considering all your options. That's for me how you need to answer this question. Then the next tricky question is, a lot of interviewers ask, tell something about yourself. What an interviewer is here looking is a combination of some common interest. I would say don't jump into by saying, I'm a huge RCB fan or a cricket fan or a football fan, or I like cooking. I would say start with something that are intangible skills that you bring in. So let's say, hey, I'm actually very humorous and I get along with all my college friends. Or you can even say, I'm an introvert, but I spend a lot of time reading and I like to read nonfiction or certain subject matter that is related to the job, right? So what you're doing is you're saying, hey, I'm somebody who likes to learn, right? And then you can add something about yourself that is personal as well to round things out. So that's for me, how you can answer yourself. Again, this is a little more trickier one where I don't think there's a right answer. At least for the others, there is a really good answer you can frame. You can talk about yourself. What I would say is don't go on a monologue, right? The other thing before we go forward I want to talk about is just going back to clarity of thought, listening, is also how you frame your answers during an interview, right? A lot of people tend to think while they're talking, which leads you to continue to talk and lose track of the question that somebody's asked you. In any interview, be it face-to-face or virtual, when somebody asks you a question that you clearly are not prepared or don't have an answer, I would say take your time. It's perfectly normal. Don't be nervous. Think it through and try and answer it with 2 or 3 sentences and stop. No interview question for me should be a long paragraph or a verbal diarrhea, right? And that usually happens, as I said, when we think on the go. Instead, when, let's say, even somebody asks you to tell you about yourself, just have 1 or 2 lines. The other way to give any answer is think about how that could lead to a potential next question, right? And you can always turn your answers to meet your requirement. So let's say you want to showcase a skill or a strength, you can give an answer that most likely will lead to a follow-up question that will only help you. So those are ways that you can sort of, I would use the word manipulate the interviewer to make you a better candidate compared to others. So that's tip number 5. Tip number 6 is always prepare a list of questions to ask your interviewer at the end. This might not happen all the time, but most times an interviewer keeps some amount of time for you to ask questions. Most times candidates don't have any questions. I would say that's a negative. It again shows that they haven't really thought about the role. They have not prepared. I've highlighted some questions that you can consider. Ask the interviewer what does the day-to-day responsibility looks like. Ask them specifically about what are the company values or how they would describe the culture of an organization. Ask them what they think might be the most challenging thing about the role. Ask them what is work-life balance within an organization, right? This is a good time to actually ask them what is the application process or what is the process for the interviews, right? Interviewers are happy to talk about that. One tricky thing here is this a good time to ask about salary? This is my personal opinion. I would say this is a good time. Be it if you're a fresher, if the organization hasn't already shared what their salary range is, I believe personally that it's a good time. One, if it isn't within your expectation, you shouldn't waste time, right? You should know your worth. It's perfectly normal, I would say, to ask someone what the salary range is, but don't let it be the first question, right? Talk about some of the responsibility, ask some questions, and then to ask about salary range. What most interviewers is going to reply back to you is, what is your expectation? Again, really important, have an expectation. Do a bit of research. There are, online resources like Glassdoor where you can get a sense. Talk to people within the sector to get a range, what the salary might be. Have an expectation, right? If it is not within your expectation, let's say the salary range is between 10 to 15,000 that the company has, and you come and say 20,000, I'm telling you, the interviewer will tell you, hey, that is a little beyond our range, right? What that gives is then set expectations on both sides. You don't want to go through an interview process where you, let's say, have multiple rounds of interview. Let's say you spend time doing an assignment and you reach an offer stage where the company offers you something that is way below your expectation. It's a complete waste of time for either party. So I would say, bring up the salary question during your first interview itself. There might be chances that the interview might not know. It's perfectly fine. You have every right to ask the salary range, right? Just make sure that it's not the first question that you're asking when you get the opportunity. Great. So that's assuming that the interview is over. There is still things that you need to do post the interview as well. We'll talk about that, right? Once the interview is over, as I said, it's not over yet. I think a personalized thank you letter makes a big impression. I think people underestimate it. You probably got the recruiter's email address, whoever's email address that you've got, or it could be somebody else set up the interview and you interviewed with someone else. Still email the person saying, hey, I would like to thank you for setting up the interview, and I don't have the interviewer's email address, but I want to thank for the opportunity, right? It makes a big impression. Don't miss out on it. It literally takes 5 minutes of your time to draft 3 lines, right? It makes, I want to put in a lot of importance to say, send that personalized thank you letter. Let's say you had a really good interview, you connected with the interviewer, you felt good about it, you haven't heard back from the recruiter or the company. I would say it's perfectly okay to follow up after 5 or 7 days. I would say it's okay to follow up 2 or 3 times if you haven't heard back from them. My expectation is if I interview with someone, the least a company can do is let me know if I made it to the next round or not. If they haven't, and if they don't, for me, it's always a sign that they don't value candidates, right? And if they don't value candidates, they probably don't value their employees. It's, at least personally for me, it's an orange sign. You can follow up 2 or 3 times. What you should avoid is trying to connect with an interviewer on social media, on LinkedIn, messaging them, asking them, hey, what's happened? If you haven't heard back from them after 2 or 3 times of follow-up, it's fine. What you can do is the 3rd time is, hey, I felt that the interview really went well. I haven't heard back. Can you give me a feedback? Got it. That could be a way that they might respond. Even if they don't, it's fine. But 2 or 3 times, not more than that. I would say just hope for the best and be patient. If you don't hear back, which might be the case most of the times, don't lose hope. Keep applying. Right? It is, as I said, a competitive process. You will have to keep doing this over and over again. And just want to summarize everything that I've spoken about. Tip number 1, most important, do your research. Read about the role and the organization before the interview. I want to emphasize this over and over again. Don't go for an interview unprepared. For me, I've had interviews where within 5 minutes, after the first 2 questions, which is usually what I ask candidates, 1, what do you know about the company? What do you know about the role? And if they don't give a good answer, or if they don't give a straightforward answer, I will not waste my time. I say, thank you, you haven't done your research, let's not waste each other's time. Be confident, warm, have a strong body language, and smile during your interview. Excuse me. I think it's important to be warm. It's important to be polite. Don't raise your voice. Don't argue with an interviewer. Those are strictly no-nos. Be confident. You can still be confident. You might have a disagreement. Know when to keep quiet. Know when to listen, especially in an interview. Convey your interest about the role and the organization through your answers during the course of the interview. Prepare a list of questions for the interviewer. That's what I want to write. Or prepare for the interview. You've seen the questions that I've shared. Those are out of that 6-7 questions I shared. At any interview, you will at least get 3 or 4. You can prepare yourself, right? And have a prepared list of questions to ask the interviewer about the role, the company, team members, work culture. And if you feel comfortable, bring up the salary conversation as well. And I want to end by saying that, as I said earlier, job hunting is exhausting. I equate it to dating, or when you're dating, you might keep getting rejected multiple times. Job hunting is the same, right? You might be interested in a role, there's no response. You might be interested in someone, there's no response. It takes a lot of energy. It will take longer to get a job than you hope for. It's normal to be restless and tempted to get disheartened. I would say stay positive, work on your strengths, strategize your job search so you can get results. And I said earlier, if you get an interview, you should take it as a very positive sign, because you probably got selected from anywhere between at least 50 to 100 candidates, right? So you really do stand out. So that's it for the webinar. If you have any questions, as I said, do drop it in the chat window. I have some questions that have come through during the registration process. So one question is, what are type of questions I can ask after the interview? I think we've covered that. Ask about the role. I think that's the key, right? You really want to understand from the interviewer what they think is the role. A good question is, what would be my objective for the next 3 to 6 months? What do you think will be challenging part about the role? Asking about the organization, the culture, who your reporting manager would be, what is the reporting style, all of that, right? Interesting question is, what do I do if the interview is rude or impolite? If you feel uncomfortable, if you think an interviewer is being annoying, cocky, rude, you have every right to leave. If you don't want to leave, just keep quiet, answer the questions. I don't think you should work for an organization where the interviewer is polite or impolite or rude, right? For me, that is a definite red flag. I would be the first person to... I've been in an interview where I felt uncomfortable by the tone, by the way the interviewer was asking questions, where I said, hey, I don't think this is going to work out. Right. You're not that desperate to get a job. Yes. How do I negotiate on salary? Yeah, so negotiation on salary, I think by itself is a different topic. I wouldn't get too much into detail. My advice there would be to have the expectation in mind, right? Do a bit of research. Be realistic about your expectation, right? Look at what the industry standards are. As I said, during your first interview, set that expectation up with the interviewer, right? You should answer that by saying, this is my expectation, I am negotiable. What is the salary range? As I said earlier, most of the interviewers will have a salary range. If you are above that, they will definitely say that you're above it. If you're below it, they would say that you're within the salary range, right? Yeah, that would be my advice. So those are questions that have come in. If there's any other questions by the participants, I'm happy to take them right now. Okay, I don't think there are any questions. I hope this webinar was useful. Thank you for attending it. We are recording this webinar and we'll be sharing it. We will also reach out to you in terms of just getting feedback about the information that's been shared. So thanks again for joining. Have a great evening.